more details about the Acolyte have emerged, and specifically the cancellation of the Acolyte. Jeff Snyder over at his newsletter, Jeff Snyder's been breaking a lot of news recently. He got some scoops on Bo DeMeo and what happened with X-Men 97 last week. And this week he had some more details about the decision to cancel the Acolyte. So this is at theinsnyder.com, which is a paid newsletter. Headline of the article: Inside the decision to cancel the Acolyte, who nearly played Saul and the future of Lucasfilm. This article has a bunch of interesting details about why the Acolyte was canceled and what's going on at Lucasfilm. So let's get into it. Here's a quote from the article. While there has been a lot of hand-wringing online about what might have happened to the show and what could still happen regarding its availability on Disney+, I'm told by sources I trust that there's no big mystery to be solved or conspiracy afoot. Insiders explained that the Acolyte was canceled because viewership was bad and that there's really nothing more to it, even though at least one cast member said they were surprised by the decision. I'm told that the Acolyte's viewership collapsed following the first 2 episodes, whereas with Andor, viewership steadily climbed throughout the season, so the show was renewed for season 2. Andor also drew exceptional reviews, whereas the Acolyte's reviews were more mixed. You can blame Lucasfilm for a lot of things, but not this one, said one source. If more people watched it, then it would have been renewed, end quote. Patrick, I have to say, I find this to be pretty convincing. This matches with the Nielsen data that we have about the show, having a strong premiere and then falling off. Apparently, also, the show had one of the least viewed Star Wars finales out of any of the Star Wars shows that are on Disney+. So this does strike me as very plausible, and I think it's worth mentioning given all the speculation that has swirled around why the show was canceled. Any other reactions, Patrick, to that component at least?
Yeah, it certainly sounds plausible, lines up with our own reactions and read on the show as it went on. I still stand by, though, they greenlit a show with an enormous budget, putting it in a setting with unfamiliar characters, unfamiliar worlds, unfamiliar settings, did seem as though, like, your expectations need to be calibrated. And so that's the one question that sort of remains for me here is, what was the definition of a hit here? What was the definition of being enough? Was the viewership so catastrophic that even for a show that, hey, we don't expect it to do anything close to sort of like the numbers of a lot of these other shows where you can put, doesn't matter how bad of a show you put, you attach the name Obi-Wan, you put Obi-Wan on it, some amount of people are going to show up because of sort of the brand capital, sort of the fan following. That's where I still take issue with the entire greenlighting of this show, the budget process of this show. It put itself in a situation where there were going to be undue expectations on a setting, a set of characters, and a storyline that didn't have the sort of easy grasps that a lot of other Star Wars shows are going to have in terms of, why are you watching? What's getting you here?
Yeah. I mean, some people have been doing the math, and the Acolyte is calculated to have cost $630,000 per minute of screen time.
That's irresponsible. That is just genuinely irresponsible budgeting, accounting, expectation setting. And again, it's difficult because the show is deeply flawed. Like, it was a show that you and I were exceptionally mixed on, would be the most generous way of interpreting a reaction to a lot of that show. Things we were high on, many things we were low on, but liked a lot of what it was gesturing at, even if the execution was pretty flawed. But again, even if that number is 2x, right? Like, even if it's way off, but it's that is still an incalculable amount of money, an irresponsible amount of money to set on a show that should have had just more moderate budgeting expectations. Hey, we're trying something new here. But applying the same level of pizzazz that is applied to every other Star Wars production, I think was a gross miscalculation.
Right.
Maybe it would allow the show to have spent more time in its writing, in its storytelling, if it wasn't as obsessed with trying to create the spectacle. And as many people have pointed out, I don't see that money on the screen in that show. It's not a bad looking show by any means, spectacular fights, but it is not as though I watched that show and thought to myself, well, now there's $200 million. It's just not that type of show. And at that point, you've just set up so many points of failure for its stuff the show did itself, and then things beyond its grasp, sort of around the actual infrastructure of Lucas, seem to both play a part in the lack of a season 2.
I agree with you about the responsible budgeting that this show did not exhibit it. You can imagine a world where they instead spent 70 or 80 million dollars instead of 180 million dollars in the show, and then the expectations for its success are way lower, right? And it's like, oh, actually, we can make another one of these seasons and build on this universe and make it a complete story. It doesn't seem like they went in that direction, and that's a shame. Where I disagree with you is I do think the money's on screen. Like there are a lot of action scenes in this show, and by and large, the action scenes look good. And I really
Mhm.
appreciate that they had the ambition of going for it when it came to these action scenes. Like it feels like they spared no expense for the action scenes. Like that's the one thing I really like about the show.
To a
I,
fault. I think, you know what? In retrospect, maybe just have one really good lightsaber scene.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think what there was. How many episodes of the show were there?
7 or 8, right?
Yeah,
There were at
eight.
least 2.
There were 8 episodes, and I think there was out of the 8 episodes, I think there was probably about 5 to 6 lightsaber battles of the out of those like 8 episodes, right?
Right, and
So
several of those were all-timers. Like, some of the
yes,
best lightsaber fights I have seen in Star Wars, in a
yeah,
show that most people didn't watch to begin with and are never gonna be inclined to watch because they've heard so much bad, word of mouth about it, and there's an entire cliffhanger for,
yeah.
any sort of lack of resolution. So they're sort of just, like, time capsuled, over on Disney Plus, in a way that in that respect is really tragic. A lot of really good, like, the best parts of the show are gonna end up going unwashed by the very people that would probably appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't know. Like if they hadn't gone for it, we wouldn't have gotten those action scenes, and maybe the show would have had a better chance of not being canceled. But then the few things that we did like about the show would not be as good, and so it's like okay, uh, tough choice. I'm glad that they attempted to do stuff as ambitious as they did in the show. I'm bummed that they did it in the context of the rest of the show, which was not as good. Okay, so what else came out of this report from Jeff Snyder's newsletter? There was a lot of speculation about whether or not the Acolyte would actually be removed from Disney Plus. Now, if you are new to following this news, you might not remember that there was an entire series based off of the movie Willow that Disney Plus released that I believe has been completely removed off of the service. Like it streamed, it didn't do well, and then they completely removed it from the service. So, as far as I can understand, it is almost completely inaccessible. It was part of a cost-cutting initiative that Disney undertook, but I think it's like one of those deeply upsetting stories about how the streaming world is doing damage to the industry because it used to be back in the day. Uh, there were many things that if you were actor or you were a crew member or whatever, if you did a movie or TV show, you could count on. Like, hey, the TV show or movie might be bad, but at least I can point to it online and be like, look, I worked on this, right? Like if you're a
Or there's a disc. Like, you only get a couple of
right,
seasons, but every show that had a season in between this one season and the next got a box set that went out,
yes,
or a
there's a
series of discs.
DVD
And
you can buy on eBay. You know,
there's
if you're
something you can point to, or you can buy it on iTunes, right? Like, it's like,
yes,
hey, we're not streaming it. We're like, but it's cheaper just to put it up here and have people pay on demand. There was an option for you to access it, even if there were hoops to jump through.
yeah, and with the removal of shows like Willow, it's not just Willow. Obviously, other things have happened. There's entire movies that have been made that just never released, like the Batgirl movie. So, like in this new cost cutting era, we are in a world where TV shows can just vanish in a way that is kind of shocking. And I think a lot of people were afraid that this would happen with the Acolyte as well. But people were like trying to look for Acolyte merchandise online, and they were finding that there was no results. And so people were freaking out that they were going to remove the Acolyte and like wipe it from the collective memory, like they did with the Willow TV show. But according to Jeff Snyder, there's no plans to remove the Acolyte from Disney Plus. So if you are afraid of that, you don't need to be worried about that for now. Another big piece of information dropped in this report, which is that Keanu Reeves was apparently in talks for the role ultimately played by Lee Jung Jae, Soul.
Hmm.
Obviously, the Squid Game actor ended up portraying that character. But apparently, Lionsgate refused to adjust the actor schedule for Ballerina, which is the upcoming John Wick spinoff, in which Keanu Reeves plays a key supporting role alongside star Ana de Armas. End quote. So he was never officially offered the role, but he was apparently extremely interested in doing the show. And by the way, it would have been pretty freaking cool
Yes.
if he and Carrie Ann
Yes.
Moss were able to team up again for the Acolyte. Like that would have been great to see them together, you know? But apparently Lucasfilm remains very interested in working with him, so we might see Keanu Reeves pop up in a Star Wars property in the future. At the end of the day, I don't know. I think Soul's character, Lee Jung Jae, I think did fine in that role, but the character is so poorly written. He keeps getting interrupted anytime he wants to say any revealing information about what's going on, and in a way that's almost comical. And to see Reeves in that role, I think would have also not been great. I don't know. It would have been nice to see him and Carrie Ann Moss together again in a movie that's not Matrix Resurrections, but yeah, I don't know that this would have been a great thing for Keanu Reeves to be in this.
It was a waste of both actors, ultimately,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like you
Would
have
been,
two
yeah.
really talented actors who were being underserved by the story, by the writing, by the production, and so it's less. Oh, like I'm still excited to see Keanu Reeves potentially in something, Star Wars, like the lightsaber fighting certainly fits like a certain set of skills my man has that would probably be pretty cool to see in a live action Star Wars setting. And so, it's unfortunate for the actor who was cast as Soul, and I guess we're saved from Keanu Reeves not being wasted in that regard, but it ultimately ends up being, a role that was underserved by so much of the story that was told, and it ends up being kind of a bummer, whatever way you slice it.
Yeah.
It is interesting how many. Reeves he's never shied away from genre fare. I mean, he's voicing Shadow the Hedgehog in the upcoming Sonic the Hedgehog. He's just he voiced in motion capture, extensive voice in motion capture of the Cyberpunk game.
Cyberpunk,
He chooses interesting, cool roles, and so the idea that he would also want to be in Star Wars is interesting. And what the only last point I would make there is one of the points we made in talking about like what does it mean to be in a Star Wars production. At some point it probably makes it harder and harder to get someone like a Keanu Reeves into a role like this. Like, does he look at the Acolyte and everything that went around it? How aware is he of any of that? Who knows? Like, hopefully far less than you and I are aware of what's going on online. But, does that look like a missed bullet? Do you want to be associated with Star Wars after seeing what happened in the Acolyte? That if you're, a self-aware actor, like I can imagine that being something that's on your mind.
The one last bit of news that this article at theinsnyder.com dropped is that according to Jeff Snyder, quote, the company Lucasfilm is developing several new shows that haven't been announced yet. And also Kathleen Kennedy's job is safe through at least Q2 of next year. So all the haters out there can stop gossiping about her imminent exit. She's not going anywhere as of now, end quote. Patrick Klepek, I think you and I feel the same way about this, which is that we have nothing personal against Kathleen Kennedy, who is an extremely accomplished producer.
Absolutely.
But I think both of us feel as though Star Wars, whoever is responsible, Kathleen Kennedy, it may not even be Kathleen Kennedy's decision making in a lot of these.
It could be maybe Iger set her up to fail.
Maybe
years
Iger
and years ago. Right.
Absolutely. I mean, I still think that honestly, something that I think about a lot, Patrick Klepek, is my sense is that Iger rushed the production of Rise of Skywalker so that
not just Rise of Skywalker, like original sin of modern Star Wars can be firmly pinned. There's plenty of reporting showing that Iger ushered that along. Abrams multiple times had to fight for extended release dates on like even as early as The Force Awakens. And so there, again, doesn't make Kennedy or any other, nameless executives who are all involved in this process, but we don't see their, faces associated with the brands. There is a collective failure of imagination and execution in what has led Star Wars to this place. But these companies put out these people as they are brands themselves. Kathleen Kennedy is a brand. And so it is less like my criticisms are less lobbied at the
Absolutely.
person,
Yeah.
as much as you're the person that walks out on stage. You're the person that does all the interviews. Like, so the buck in a public sphere, when I can look at, like, try and pin it on something, when I can point to something, it's the person who says, I'm the face of Star Wars. And Kathleen Kennedy has, in the modern era, said, I am the production face of the highway that Star Wars is built upon. And so that's more just a shorthand than
Sure.
anything else. But I think it is a complex mix of failures that go all the way back to the original production of The Force Awakens. That,
Yeah.
like, what is this universe? What does it mean post, like, prequels, post
Right.
original trilogy? There are a lot of storytelling missteps that have, I think, made a hard task harder, but nonetheless do not excuse, like, the Acolyte's problems don't have to do with Iger making The Force Awakens, like, Rush and Rise of Skywalker. You know what I mean?
We are enough removed.
So
I mean, but the
it's a
point
different era.
I actually I agree with everything you said. The point I was making is, like, Rise of Skywalker came out, I think, in December of 2019. Iger stepped down weeks later, basically,
Yeah.
shortly after it came out, and so I think he wanted to go out on a high note.
Nailed it.
He wanted this movie to come out, and the movie,
Yep.
by the way, did do
Oh, of course.
well financially. It just was creatively, I think, kind of a disaster, and notoriously had a very troubled production and was rushed, and it was unclear if J.J. Abrams was even going to come back, and it had a different director on point, and so he wanted to, like, get this done, and we ended up having, like, a pretty sad and awful conclusion to one of the most beloved franchises of all time. And yeah, I still think about that, because it's like, if a movie is good, it's good forever. Like, if a movie is bad, it's bad forever. And it's like, but a delayed movie can still be good, right? And so, that's the thing. That's the kind of one of the what if scenarios. I wonder if, like, what if Rise of Skywalker had been given an additional 2 years
Mm-hmm.
to marinate, and for the script, for them to, like, nail down the script, and whatever, would it have been a better film?
Could have been
Possibly.
worse.
Possibly. Yeah.
Let him cook. Maybe it could have been worse.
Yeah. But anyway, whatever the case, Kathleen Kennedy's job is safe through Q2 2025, and I don't know, man. Like, I don't think anything we said last week is changing in terms of our feelings on the direction of this franchise. Still feels like in a pretty sad place. Patrick, having, like, this has been a big topic of conversation online, even since the last time we recorded, and I'm
Mhm.
curious if you've had any other reflections on this matter.
Well, there's a couple. The thing that sticks out to me is we have, in some ways, what are the lessons from this, right? What do we learn from, if the Acolyte skeleton crew are going to end up being sort of the conclusion of an arc of a certain era of production of Star Wars television? It seems like, in theory, Star Wars, both from a theatrical and on television streaming, however you want to characterize it, could be undergoing potentially sort of a creative and production pivot in the same way that Marvel is attempting to make. They put out a lot more productions. It's a lot more convoluted than Star Wars, but similarly, like, hey, the decisions about the Acolyte, Skeleton Crew, a lot of these decisions are made years and years, like 5 years ago, like the first inklings of, like, how things like this are going to happen. Like, these new television shows that are, quote, like, in development, right?
Yeah.
In theory, these shows reflect years with The Mandalorian, Ahsoka,
Right.
Acolyte, Skeleton Crew, years of failed theatrical productions trying to get off the ground. What is the vision of Star Wars going forward? Now, if you follow the theatrical stuff, it's a lot of fits and starts. It's just fits, starts, and then not continuing to start because the movies get announced, don't go into production, and there's a new slate of movies you're supposed to get excited all over again. Is there an opportunity, now that we are separated from the writer strike, actor strike, COVID's not gone, but, like, we're out of sort of, like, the COVID production troubles, like, we're in a more normal environment
Yeah.
in terms of just making stuff.
Yeah.
Is this an opportunity for a soft reset? What does that look like if Kennedy and that sort of creative brain trust, now that Filoni is instituted as kind of the George Lucas, like the Feige sort of figure in Star Wars, you can interpret that in many different ways. There's the ways to look at that in good ways, there's ways to look at that in bad ways. What is that second swing? What is that? Because I think that's what has been lacking for me. Of, at the end of the day, like, just give me a vision of what you want Star Wars to be, because nothing like after Force Awakens, Last Jedi has suggested to me a singular idea. And that doesn't mean it has to be interconnected in the Marvel sense. It just has to be a coherent idea of like, what stories do you want to tell? What do you find interesting about Star Wars? It has just been a lot of throwing things at the screen, whether you're streaming it or in a theater, and a lot of it hasn't stuck and it hasn't felt thematically coherent. And that's what I would want to see, is some sort of idea of like, what do you think Star Wars is anymore? And what stories do you want to tell?
A boy can dream, Patrick Klepek.
A boy can dream.
A boy can dream. A boy can dream. So anyway, those are some more thoughts about what happened with The Acolyte and its cancellation over the course of the last couple of weeks. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.